Welcome to The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Hi, moms.
Hey, a lot has happened since we recorded last.
Yeah, we threw out half of our basement.
Oh yeah, that was amazing and painful.
Yeah.
But really good.
Yeah. International moves, I don't recommend them.
I mean, to be fair, I feel like this international adventure did amazing things for our family. But if we could just have transported here and back a la Star Trek, that would have been much nicer.
Yes, it would have.
Yeah. But eventually it's going to be done.
So what's up first, moms?
Well, I mean, the move remains like a huge thing going on, but you also had another amazing thing happen.
A new PB at the gym?
That's not what I was thinking of. You learned important things about yourself.
That I'm leaning towards being an anti-theist? No, wait. I secretly don't like bacon. No, we do our best to preserve anonymity for our kids and for ourselves, but without sort of naming names, where we live right now is very difficult to get an appointment with a psychiatrist.
Ridiculously hard.
Ridiculously hard. And I was researching a character for a story, and I have, backing up a slightly more, I have a history of teaching folks, with ASD. And so I realized I had never actually mined any of that experience for any of my storytelling. So I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to try to take advantage of the fact that I have all this experience and that I was typically praised especially by parents of kids with ASD, with my ability to connect with them and to meet with them at their level, regardless of their ability to communicate verbally, eye contact, physically, whatever, for whatever reason. And so
Dave, when you say ASD, you mean autism
spectrum disorder.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, sorry, I should back up there. And so I did, and I found myself taking an autism quiz. And I had behavioral indicators of autism. I took another one. Same result. I took 6 more. Same result. So I was like, I go to our family doctor and I'm like, hey, so there's this thing and I wouldn't mind learning more about it. And she put in a request. This was in April of last year that I did this. So over a year ago.
And we still have not heard anything back.
And we still have not heard anything back from them. And because it's just that there is such a shortage of psychiatrists that, somebody who is an adult who isn't like about to harm themselves, there isn't an urgency to provide that person with psychiatric care of this sort. And I'm not making some sort of moral pronouncement about that. It's just the fact that they just don't have enough people to see everybody who needs help, which is a shame. It's a failing. But we discovered that while we were visiting family elsewhere, that we would be able to, while we were there in that place, remotely have me meet, like by Zoom, have me meet with a psychiatrist who would be able to work through a diagnosis. And so I connected with them, paid the fee, did all the many questionnaires, hundreds and hundreds of questions. Did my meeting. Afterwards, I did a follow-up series of questionnaires. You did a questionnaire. And then I finally got diagnosed. I am officially ADHD, so autism with ADHD and generalized anxiety and social anxiety. So as I told the kids, I kind of have a poker hand of neurodivergence. And now that I know that, I have the ability to get to take advantage of resources after we move back to close to where the psychiatrist actually lives, which is interesting. That was not intentional. And that's just going to help me with relationships of all sorts, with managing anxiety and schedules and expectations and all that sort of like social processing stuff that I've just generally always had a problem with. And it's really interesting, like that. And what I'm about to say is sort of like a 1-2, which is you mentioned through that process after I got the diagnosis, how when I proposed this investigation of mine, that you initially were like, oh, wait, no, I don't think so. And then you thought about it and you're like, oh yeah, wait, yeah. There are like a bunch of things I can think back on. This is me talking through you. Mm-hmm. A bunch of things I can think back on where Pops has exhibited behaviors that, you know, could be classified as such. And then after I told you about two stories I'll share right now. Again, like I have no shame about this degree of honesty. It's actually part of my autism, the oversharing thing. Which I realized also then, I guess I'll have 3 points to say here, because the first one before I forget is, I don't know if y'all were familiar with Clubhouse before it kind of imploded, but it was this social networking app where you would just like have rooms of people talking to each other, and you would have like a room leader with perhaps like an expert in some sort of field that would be talking, and you'd have a discussion or whatever, like a salon. Like a French salon, like 19th century, you know, rich intellectuals gathering in some sort of parlor, drinking drinks and talking big things. And so while I was on Clubhouse, I kept getting weird responses from people because it would be a topic that I would be really engaged in, and it would be my turn to speak. And I would just more likely than not just overshare, not just talk too much, just like overshare. And then I realized after the fact, after I got the diagnosis, oh wait, that's a thing. I did that. And then I realized how when you got into a car accident, this is going to make me sound like a total a-hole. But again,
this was like also so long ago. We have to clarify, how
this was
long ago
very
this was.
Early in our relationship. Yeah. This is well before I even had the mental framework, the humility, the introspection to tackle something like my own neurodivergence. I was not ready.
This was probably like
the first year of our relationship.
Yeah. So
20 years ago.
Yeah.
20 years ago. And you got into a car accident. Thankfully, you were fine, but you were really rattled and you needed my help to come pick you up, help you out. And because it was the middle of the day and I had a schedule, I immediately was like sighing and exasperated that I would have to change my schedule to do this thing, even though I already loved you at that point. I don't think I had the language for that, but I already did. And I did help you. But my first reaction wasn't, oh my gosh, Mom's was in a car accident. Moms, are you okay? It was balking at that big schedule change. And I realized that was me processing this traumatic event through the framework of that schedule shift, that I did have a strong reaction, but the strong reaction wasn't like through empathy for you. It was for, my disruption, which is really interesting. And then also the other one was when Go was born not breathing. You were like, after you learned that, after I told you learned from the doctors and me that he was born not breathing, and you were really still out of it and you weren't aware. You were like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you managed that.
And okay, I was not out of it. That was terrifying because I had just given birth and the doctor was doing their like, I couldn't sit up. The doctor was doing the like, did we get all the placenta out? Like,
got it. Okay.
And which she didn't do correctly, by the way. It was, but she was doing all that. So I could not sit up and I did not hear him crying. And I kept asking, is everything okay? And nobody was saying anything. And it was really scary, but it was even scarier for you because you saw Go like purple and all the doctors.
No, he wasn't purple. He wasn't purple. He was orange.
He was orange. Yes.
And his fingernails were purple.
Yeah.
He had poor circulation.
Yeah.
And so, okay, then thank you for clarifying, moms. And so, then upon reflection after realizing my diagnosis, because I handled it well, because I immediately, when he was born not breathing, I immediately let go of a potential relationship with him to start to manage, okay, now self, what do I need to do to help manage this situation of a child who was stillborn? That it was very dispassionate calculation that I did. And I realized, like with your car accident, that was my response to something that was traumatic, that I actually did have an emotional reaction to, that I didn't process that actual reaction until much later. In that moment, I reacted in coping through some other lens, some other path. Very fascinating stuff. But I like I said a couple minutes ago, I was not ready to embark on this journey years ago when I probably should have. But I'm glad I did now, and now I have resources. But yeah, skepticism 101. Look at yourself first.
Well, it is so interesting because when you told me you were looking into it and you had taken the tests, it was this interesting thing of like, it would never have occurred to me on my own. Like, not in a million years. If it had been left to me, there was not going to be a date where I went and was like, Pops, do you think you should take an autism test? Like, absolutely not. It was not even the tiniest glimmer in the back of my mind. But like you said, the second you said it, it didn't take me long thinking about it to think, this could really explain some things because you are such a empathetic, caring person.
Thank you.
But there have just been times where it's just like, curiously, I'm like, why did Pops not think of that? Like, it just, it's so funny. The first time, and I haven't even brought this one up, but
please,
the first time you met my dad,
yeah,
it did not go well.
Okay.
And that was
I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably for the best.
Yeah. And that was, and one, you clearly did not know that it had not gone well. But I think that was a mixed bag and had a lot to do with my relationship with my dad at the time. But I do remember during that meeting, like their visit, just being like, Pops is not trying to impress them at all. Like, this is the first time meeting this very important person in my life, and there's just doesn't really seem to be any acknowledgement or effort put into that. And so looking back, I'm kind of like, well, that makes a little bit more sense. And then it's just things like much more recently, your parents were visiting,
Mm-hmm.
and we were watching something in the evening, and it was like 2 nights in, and I had to go to you and be like, do you think we should watch something that your parents would actually enjoy? And you were like, oh yeah, no, of course. We should be doing that. And it was just in moments like that where kind of the ability to pick up and respond didn't always match what I see in you so much of the time.
It's so interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So the move is occupying my entire psyche right now. I've shelved so much of my writing, and thankfully, like my version of my stoicism practice has helped me let go of that compulsion. I got to call it that, a compulsion to have a certain amount of writing output on my schedule to feel accomplished, like as far as like a coping mechanism for various things. And so I worked out how to reframe it. And so I'm comfortable with not writing as much because I have so much other work to do to get this move right. And I need it to go right. It's just like, it's a thing.
Yeah.
And so I can't wait for the move to be done for a number of reasons, but one of them being that I can then shift my focus back to taking advantage of some of those resources that the psychiatrist I met with gave to me. You know, there's one lady who works just with high D, or like high highs, so high functioning, high IQ folks, where they'd have those sorts of like social processing situations, communication issues. That's like the relationship things, like those sorts of abilities not matching their goals and expectations for themselves. So like there are things that I want to do with my life, and I want to make sure that I represent myself as well as I can, and also like as compassionate and outgoing and empathetic and collaborative as I need to be, because all the things that I want to do are collaborative in nature. And so it behooves me to cover all my bases. Right. And I can't wait to get on that journey. And I'll probably end up oversharing about that once I get into the weeds with you guys. So,
well, it may not be great in all social situations, but like it's made for podcasting.
I guess that's true. But it is very cathartic being able to talk about it now, because there are those things where it's like, why did I act that way? Why was I so chill when Go was born not breathing? Why was I such a jerk when you were in your car accident? Like little things like, why did it take a conversation 48 hours later for me to realize, oh yeah, I should consider my parents' tastes? Like it's a whole spectrum, pun intended, of responses that, like, big and small, that point to me having to work things out in a different way, and then needing to better learn tools I can use. And so it's an exciting process, but it's very humbling, and it is absolutely 100% like part of my own journey in skepticism. Not being afraid. And it's something that I've talked about with the kids throughout the process, because they have friends who are autistic at school. They know what it's like, but they also know that I'm not lower functioning like some of the kids they have in their classes. But it's still a matter of processing. And so they understand more than I initially anticipated. And so knowing that, it made it much easier. Their understanding and openness with talking about it actually gave me the strength, in part, to face the diagnosis, to go through the process, it was a multi-step process. It was a pain in the butt to make work, but we did it. And so it was sort of a triumph of parenting in that regard too, because it was me, and it gave me an opportunity to put my skepticism into action in front of my kids. Like, I have a hypothesis about myself. Let's test it. And then let's be honest about the results, and then take actions afterwards. And so I guess in sort of like a somewhat of a scientific, I was going to say pseudo, that's not appropriate here, but somewhat of a scientific method. Now I'm going to try to develop some sort of model that I can use moving forward that helps me deal with this thing that I now understand is a thing.
I never even asked, did they have any sort of questions when you told them? Or
no, because they see me, they know me, and they know that if I did get such a diagnosis, that it doesn't change who I am. I'm still, the dad that they already know.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of they were happy for me knowing, because then, as I explained, then I would have resources available to me that could help me cope, be a better dad. Like, it benefits them.
Yeah. I'm going to go rogue.
Oh my gosh. So you're going to get like a white streak in your hair and I can't touch you anymore?
I definitely don't want number 2 to happen.
Okay.
I would love a white streak.
Yeah.
My mom.
Like Caitlin Moran.
Yes. Which she has done partially professionally. So like, I could make this happen. But when my mom was in grad school, she had this very scary but very brilliant professor. And I sat in on one class and she was going great, but like with these amazing white streaks through her hair. And ever since then, I was like, oh, that's how I want to go gray. That is not how I'm going gray.
Make that happen. We have the technology.
I know. I think once we move, I'm going to try to find a hairdresser to be like, all right.
It's not going to take a lot of effort. It's like, it's not like me and like a single needle tattoo artist. You can go into a hair salon and be like, can you give me a gray streak? They'll be like, sure.
Well, no,
any salon.
I know.
Okay.
But yeah,
so we're putting it out there. Mom says not research this at all. And
no, this is
far overestimating the challenge of the situation.
But I am, it is probably one of the few things I am angry about in my aging, that I am just getting like salt and pepper gray and not beautiful streaky gray.
Salt and pepper is beautiful too. All gray is beautiful. You want to know why? Because it's true.
I mean, my grandma had the most beautiful white hair. Mm-hmm. And if I end up getting there, I'll be totally down with that.
You could also dye your hair platinum.
I could. I don't know. Yeah.
You would look stunning with platinum hair. That it would make your eyes just like go pop, pop, pop.
Thank you. At some point I might do that.
Because you have 3 eyes. I did 3 pops.
Oh my gosh. But rogue. Yeah. Okay. So, but we sort of had 2 topics planned, but life is very difficult. So I think we should just do one.
Okay. That's fine.
All right. So, I was listening to the podcast Search Engine, which is done by PJ Vogt and other people. And PJ was one of the guys who did Reply All, which was a very popular podcast that imploded.
I miss Reply All.
I know. But he's on to his next thing. It has a very similar vibe. It's certainly cool. I'd recommend checking it out. They just had an episode on trigger warnings. And I wanted to talk about it because as soon as I started thinking about it, this to me plays into kind of skepticism and, trying to be a person open to the world who is, capable of examining one's own thoughts and, constantly challenging oneself. And this has been such a big topic. And it's, it is such a issue right now in the world that people live in information silos, where they're only hearing things from one perspective. And I think like we're at a point where it's so important that people are exposed to more views. And then there's this whole trigger warning thing. And if you listen to people on the right, they're like, that's all about people being, snowflakes and not being able to handle information. But I think it's actually a more complex thing. And this is what I wanted to talk about from the episode. So I did not know, but on that episode, PJ talked about having suicidal thoughts at times and having survived a suicide attempt.
Oh my gosh.
At one point, which I did not know about. I'm so glad he is in a better place.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was really from that perspective. And they talked about a couple of things. I'll link to the episode. It's a very interesting listen. So I would definitely go and check it out. So looking at it scientifically, one thing that some studies have suggested is that when a warning is given, it doesn't necessarily help people process the information better. So they were kind of proposing that when a warning is given, like there's an idea that it's like, oh, you can like gear yourself up to handle that information.
Right.
And at least in their looking at studies, regardless of a warning, people sort of had the reaction they were going to have to that information.
Right. That actually makes sense considering how a person's reaction isn't necessarily something that they can control. Like you can control what action you take after the reaction to a certain extent, but your reaction is going to be a combination of like nature and nurture, right? Like that makes so much sense. Oh my gosh.
Also, they spoke with a couple people who had lost family members to suicide. And what they said is that the warnings actually made them very upset. Because I think one woman said, like, my life is not a trigger warning. This is my experience.
Right.
And putting a warning on my experience, it felt very invalidating. And also that actual triggers were far more specific. Like just seeing a random thing, like for most people who have experienced real trauma, it's not seeing a random thing about that trauma. It's going to be something weird that you can't even anticipate. Like her brother had died by suicide and she saw something about two siblings that were really close. And like that was really hard for her.
Okay.
But it wasn't a random article about suicide.
Got it.
You can't actually anticipate what's going to be a true, I'm kind of doing parentheses here, like a true trigger for people.
Sure.
So the warnings don't actually help people who've experienced
so fascinating
real trauma.
Okay. Right. I mean, it makes sense now that you're saying it. I can't believe that I haven't like thought of this before. I mean, I'm failing as a human being.
And then the final thing I wanted to say that they brought up is that for people who are depressed, like they are actually more likely to look at depressing material. So the idea that it's going to help people avoid looking at something that would make them sad, if you are sad, you're actually more likely to click on it.
Got it.
So that was all intriguing. I mean, that's what studies have shown. I actually don't have any issue with anything they talked about it. But I do feel like they were looking at it in a very narrow vein.
Okay.
So they went back and they kind of talked about the history of trigger warnings. And they sort of came up, they're definitely like an internet age thing. Okay. And the places that they started were like on Tumblr, I believe.
Really?
People tagging their stuff.
Okay.
And then on some like women's chat boards where it was sort of like the first place where people were talking about, sexual assault and like, discrimination and stuff that had happened.
Got it.
And so I found it intriguing because I think like when I've thought about the warnings, I have to say, like it made a lot of sense what PJ and his guests were saying, because I don't think I ever thought about them in terms of like people who had experienced that exact trauma. Okay. Because I do think that like when you've gone through something very specific, like it is so individual, but it was but they sort of didn't address it in a more generalized sense. So they were talking about a very specific thing where like you are somebody who has had a very specific trauma and you're looking at triggers for like that trauma. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it made a lot of sense to me that like this does not help with that. And I think that's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
But then it sort of made me think about like, well, but are there other use cases? So the two questions I have, are there other ways that it might be harmful that we're not thinking about? Like, is it stopping people from like seeing things that might make them learn something or like expand their thinking?
Yeah.
But also, are there use cases where it's helpful that we're not thinking about? So
I think so.
Yeah. So tell me what you think.
Well, I mean, this actually dovetails with my desire to learn more about any potential neurodivergence I might have, because it's, you know, that could be seen as an attack on a person's ego, right? Like a Band-Aid they're not willing to rip off. It could be seen as a change in status, potentially having a label that would ostracize you to a certain degree. You know, that whole changing of identity that can be so challenging, but it was necessary. Now, I'm not at all in any way trying to equate my exploration of my neurodivergence with a person who has survived a sibling suicide, for instance. They're wholly different situations, of course.
Yeah.
And my heart goes out to the person in question. But I like what she said, where it's almost insulting that, like, the idea of my experience can't be reduced to this thing that you think it should be. And there is value in facing your trauma, just as long as it's done in a respectful way. I think is the how it's being presented is more important than the what. Because you can't, like, you're not going to avoid stories about suicide. You're not going to avoid stories about, you know, CSA, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to avoid that stuff because that's unfortunately part of the human experience. Would it be better if it wasn't? Of course. Of course it would be better if it wasn't. But you can't just stick your head in the sand. Just plug your fingers in your ears. You have to face it, but you also need to make sure that how you face it is productive for you. And that's where we've talked about it in the past. That's where talking to people who are professionals in that field, talking to people to help you unpack your own situations, to give you a framework where you can heal, is so critical, right? To our effectiveness as human beings. We're on a parenting podcast here. Like, our relationships with our children are, of course, affected by that. So it's imperative that we as parents take that time to care for ourselves psychologically. So I think that we should, I agree, we should sort of reframe the idea of trigger warnings. I think it's a good impulse to have. Yeah. To be empathetic. The empathy impulse of, I don't want to make people who survived trauma feel bad. That is a good impulse. Whether or not it's productive, though, that's where you have to actually analyze. That's where you have to be skeptical and say, okay, so I have this empathy impulse. What is it actually doing for those people? You know, like, is it being productive? And then you have to actually talk to the people who would potentially be harmed by it about it. And some might say, I don't want to see any content about suicidality. So thank you for that trigger warning. So I can just absolutely avoid it. Maybe they're at a part in they're at a stage in their therapy process where they have been directed to not necessarily engage with any media that have those depictions. Maybe that is something that they're supposed to do, as well as just not wanting to do. But other people might have a completely different reaction and might actually seek to embrace it and then see, like this lady did, see, a trigger warning displayed before the content as an affront. I don't know how you get around that because because you can't have it both ways. You either have a trigger warning to protect the people who should not see it, and that same trigger warning would then negatively impact the people who would be offended by it, or you have nothing and just throw caution to the wind. I don't know. That's a real interesting question.
So I have an interesting example. So we've said before,
like there has to be a middle ground.
I know.
Or maybe there doesn't. I don't know.
But
it's worthy of exploration.
Yeah. So, because between Reader and Go, I had a miscarriage.
Yeah.
And I felt so
Eduardo.
lucky. Oh, yeah. I felt so lucky that my mom had talked to me about her miscarriage and had talked to me about how common miscarriage is.
Yeah.
Because it was, and I say, like, people don't talk about miscarriage enough.
No.
And then once you have one, like literally
everybody says
is like, oh, my wife had a miscarriage, my sister, I did. Like you suddenly realize that it is just this huge experience. And I found that very comforting. It made me feel like, that it wasn't unusual, that there was hope afterwards. I really felt like I was sort of part of the sisterhood, of people who had gone through it. And so I was so glad. So I'll link to her. I'm forgetting her name. There's an amazing woman who wrote a book, I Had a Miscarriage. And she's done like a ton of advocacy to like talk about it more. She's really cool. Jessica Zucker? I don't know. I'll link to her. But I really try to talk about it because I found that very comforting, even to the point where like I was at a conference and there was this cool young guy I was talking to, and he was talking about like how he's just whatever. He was talking about how he and his wife are like thinking of
wait. I was at a conference with this like cool guy.
Yeah.
Who's not me. Where was this?
It was BahaCon, the atheist conference.
Okay.
I wasn't attracted
you never told me
to him. Yes, okay. I did. I told you this story. Okay. So we were talking and he was talking about how he and his wife are thinking about starting to have kids and kind of the timing of it. And I like made sure to mention that we had had fertility issues and a miscarriage. Because I was like, so many young people are like, I'm just going to get pregnant easy.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's really good to know that it can be hard.
Yes.
And that's okay. But like, who knows? Like, if there was like a history of miscarriage in his family or if somebody else was there, maybe somebody would have found that hard to hear. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, when I am feeling super stressed or down,
mm-hmm.
I have a really difficult time with like lots of content. Like this whole move and everything has been very stressful. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many podcasts.
Do you want to talk about For All Mankind?
Oh God. Yeah. Well, no, that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. But like, there are so many podcast episodes just sitting on my phone because I'm like, can't really do that one.
Oh my goodness.
About so many things.
Honey.
And like at another time in my life where this was true, I was on Facebook and I was just scrolling through posts from a mom's group and somebody had posted pictures of her stillborn baby.
What?
And like, beautiful. I absolutely love that she did that. We have to normalize that, right?
Okay, yes. I agree it shouldn't, but oh my gosh.
I would have really liked a warning.
Yes.
Like there are moments in my life where I could see that and be like, oh my God, that is beautiful.
It should have been pictures in comments.
Yes.
Is what she should have done.
You are so brave.
Yes.
Love that you were able to do this for yourself.
Yes.
But like, that was hard.
That is shocking.
And I think,
Oh my goodness.
So to me, it's like, I think trigger warning is a bad word because
Okay.
to me, it's like heads up. And here's the other thing, because like it started on the internet, right?
Right.
So before we had Facebook and Instagram,
Yeah.
you could kind of have a sense of what kind of media you were going to be getting, right? Like if you listen to a news program, like that hard things are going to be on the news. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like that's life. I don't think, you listen to a news program and like the war in Gaza is going to come up. That's what's happening,
Yeah.
So you're making a choice to listen to something about current events.
Mm-hmm.
But now we are in this world of like social media where like we sign on just to like see photos from our friends and like a few funny atheist memes. But
and what do we get? We get chaos with jazz hands.
Yeah, but like it's very unmediated. Do you know what I mean? So like I have curated my Facebook to basically only show me friends and animal videos. But like you're in groups, and this stuff, there's just, I get what they were saying about like people who are depressed actually want to look at depressing, but yeah, there are times where like it has been very helpful for me psychologically to be able to be like, I am going to listen to that. I am going to see that. I am going to read that, but not now. And so you brought up For All Mankind.
Yes.
So like I said, I've been very stressed. Not trigger warning, spoiler alert. The first season of For All Mankind, one of the main characters' kids dies. And it's written beautifully. And I completely lost my shit watching one of the scenes. Like I was weeping uncontrollably. And yes. This is the other thing I wanted to say, where I'm like, this is another area where I'm like, I think we need it, because I have to say, I did not notice this until I became a mom. Mm-hmm. But, and I, look, For All Mankind did it beautifully. I don't
Vikings.
know if it, well, I'm not going to say it about Vikings. For All Mankind did it beautifully. But I will say, I didn't notice until I became a parent, a lot of storytellers are very lazy. And like, you want to hurt a character, you want to show somebody's broken, like, let's just toss in trauma. Mm-hmm. Like, give it a dead kid. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In a way that is like, and there's like a whole issue. There have been articles written about the number of shows that are just based on like dead white girls. Like, you want to give a plot to a show, throw in a dead white girl. And like, that's what drives the plot. And I think in a world where we just sort of have, all right, Laura Palmer's different.
I love how I just start snapping my fingers and you know what I'm talking about.
Laura Palmer's different because they made her a real character with agency.
Sometimes her arms bend back.
Yeah, but it is part of the trope, right? And like I do think that there's a laziness to a lot of storytelling, mm-hmm. where we just take these very big life traumas and don't treat them with a lot of subtlety or care and just use them because they're easy plot points. And I think we have to be conscious that that's something we do. And if we're doing that, like, that has an impact. And I think we have to be thoughtful about how we address it.
Hard agree.
I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I mean, there clearly isn't one.
Yeah.
I think it's a conversation that should happen and is just starting. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I think, applying our skepticism, we should look at the media that we consume and see, like, and have those conversations with the boys when we see some sort of warning come up. Right?
Yeah.
I think we should. Because it's a good way for us to sort of pay it forward to the next generation. this understanding that we're gradually having. We have to make sure that our kids learn about it as soon in their lives as possible, I think, so they can benefit from the results of that conversation before they get too old. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like if there's a warning about like flashing lights, we don't have to talk about that because some people have epilepsy.
Yeah, no, they're clear.
But if we're watching a show about World War II and they're talking about like warning concentration camp depictions, for one, our kids just finished Masters of the Air, so they've seen it.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it with them. They know. But it was a very elegant depiction of concentration camp. Yeah. It was so harrowing.
But also you're choosing to watch a show about World War II.
But that is the thing, is that you have to frame it and you say this is part of that lived experience. And so you actually are doing yourself a disservice by ignoring that part of it, because then you're not able to frame the character's actions appropriately, because Rosie sees the thing and is shaken by it as a Jew from Brooklyn. And then he it's just, you have to have those conversations as a parent. We've talked about this many times in many contexts, but like, you do your kids and yourselves no favors by avoiding those conversations. And now we can just throw trigger warnings into the mix. So we see a trigger warning, we'll say, hey guys, why do you think this trigger warning is up there? What do you think the positives and negatives are of a trigger warning like that? Before we even get into the content. Maybe we don't even know what we're about to see. Maybe it's something that's new for the whole family. We see a trigger warning. We're like, oh, let's chat about this for a second. What do you think we should expect?
Yeah. I mean, one thing the podcast brought up is like 13 Reasons Why.
I was about to say 13 Reasons Why when you brought up White Girl.
They had a warning at the front.
Yeah.
But then in the show, they also did all the things that like people who know about suicide say not to do when presenting suicides.
That is so interesting.
So it's like
what?
Like you're not supposed to show the actual suicide in graphic detail.
Got it.
You're not supposed to like glorify the results of it. You're, just like listen to the episode. They talk about it much better. But sort of the disingenuous, like we're going to warn you, but then we're also going to take none of the advice of the experts.
Yeah.
Also, like final season of Vikings, where we're going to just like invent kids to kill.
Yes.
Kids you haven't even met before.
Here's this child. Does this child look cute? Axe to the forehead.
Jesus.
Let's run that. What do you do? Let's run it over with a horse. Let's trample the child. Spear. Arrow. Why not?
It got absurd.
Let's just throw it into a well. It's absurd. So the final season of Vikings was like trauma 101.
Yeah, I loved Vikings. Can't wait to watch the first season with the boys. I am on the record that if you guys watch the final season, I will be doing something else.
Well, sure.
But
and we can do the same thing with Sons of Anarchy, but we'll skip the last like 2 or 3 seasons for totally different reasons.
Quality.
The Jax Teller apology tour. Oh my gosh. Anyway, what a conversation. And I love how I did not anticipate this in the slightest. How the topic you wanted to bring up about trigger warnings would so seamlessly like dovetail what we were talking about in the beginning with my, journey, hard look at my own neurodivergence. Huh? Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We did okay on time. So
yes,
we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you, Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And that concludes this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.
Are you typing or
my what?
Typing?
Typing? No.
Yeah. I just hear a lot of crickle crackle on your side.
That's because I'm shifting my weight on the bed.
Okay.
Because I don't have a chair.
I know. Soon we'll have chairs. Ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Let's go.